The village that disappeared overnight. The Arctic is a land of extremes. Its silence is profound, stretching endlessly across frozen lakes, vast snowfields, and pale skies that blend seamlessly into one another. The air itself seems heavier here, filled with a quiet tension that presses against the mind. Snow crunches underfoot in a sound that is both crisp and oddly muffled, as if the frozen world itself absorbs noise, leaving only the subtle whispers of wind and ice. It is in this silence that one of the most baffling mysteries of northern Canada occurred: the sudden disappearance of an entire Inuit settlement, a village that disappeared overnight, leaving behind only the physical traces of life, perfectly preserved, yet hauntingly empty. The people who lived in this settlement were intimately attuned to the land. Their survival depended on careful observation, precise planning, and an understanding of the Arctic environment that went far beyond ordinary skill. Every detail mattered: how to read the wind's direction, the patterns of the snow, the subtle signs left by caribou or foxes, the cracks forming in ice that could indicate danger. Life here demanded patience, discipline, and foresight. Clothing, tools, and shelters were not merely functional, they were a reflection of careful preparation, honed through generations. Nothing was wasted, and nothing left to chance. The village was small, a cluster of huts built strategically near Ngikuni Lake. Smoke from cooking fires typically spiraled into the cold, pale sky, signaling warmth and life. Dogs, essential for hunting and protection, moved among the huts, their presence both practical and reassuring. Children played briefly outside, before retreating into the safety of warm shelters as the wind cut through the air. Daily routines were predictable, yet vital: hunting, cooking, repairing tools, and maintaining clothing. Life here was harsh, but structured, and it relied on careful attention to detail. On a late November day in 1930, Joe Labelle, a fur trapper familiar with the region, approached the village. He expected the usual signs of life: curling smoke from chimneys, the soft murmur of voices, or the bark of dogs greeting him. But something felt wrong the moment he neared the settlement. Smoke was absent. The usual noises of life were missing. The village seemed frozen in a quiet pause, as though someone had pressed a button and suspended its existence. A weight of unease pressed on Joe's chest, and he slowed his pace, scanning the huts for signs of life. The snow around the buildings was pristine, with no footprints, no sled tracks, nothing to indicate human movement. Joe's trained eyes noticed these subtleties immediately. In a place where every movement is usually recorded in snow, the absence of disturbance was deeply unusual. He approached the first hut, gently pushing aside the flap of sewn animal skins that served as a door. Inside, he found a scene that intensified his unease. Food, now frozen solid, had been left in cooking pots. Fish were laid out on slabs as if waiting for preservation, and utensils rested exactly where they had last been used. Clothing was folded meticulously. Even the fire, though cold, had been burning recently. The scene suggested routine, normalcy, and yet the humans themselves were gone. Moving from hut to hut, Joe observed rifles leaning against walls, winter clothing neatly stored, and tools carefully placed. Nothing was missing, nothing displaced. The meticulous order of the village, a hallmark of Inuit life, contrasted sharply with the complete absence of its inhabitants. Beyond the huts, in the small graveyard, some graves appeared disturbed. Others seemed empty. Whether this was the result of animal activity or some unknown cause, Joe could not determine. The weight of mystery pressed against him like the Arctic wind itself. Joe immediately left to report his findings. Reaching the nearest RCMP station, he recounted the situation. The authorities, recognizing the seriousness of the report, dispatched searchers and trackers. When the Mounties arrived, they found the village precisely as described: shelters intact, supplies untouched, clothing and tools in place. The snow was undisturbed, with no footprints or sled marks leading away. Experienced trackers, familiar with the land and its subtle indicators, were confounded. No evidence suggested departure, struggle, or environmental disaster. The village had vanished, leaving behind only the silent remnants of life. Investigators expanded their search into the surrounding area. Nearby Inuit elders were consulted. Some described strange lights in the sky near the time of disappearance. Others spoke of an unnatural stillness, a pause in the usual rhythms of life. While these accounts were intriguing, they provided no tangible evidence. Nothing explained the absence, and no clues clarified the fate of the villagers. Inside the huts, every object was documented. Cooking utensils, tools, personal belongings, clothing, and ceremonial items remained in place. Nothing had been hastily abandoned. It was as if the villagers had stepped outside for a moment and simply never returned. The absence of tracks, signs of movement, or preparation made any ordinary explanation increasingly impossible. Various theories emerged. Seasonal migration was suggested, with villagers possibly following herds of caribou or relocating temporarily. But migration leaves evidence, footprints, sled tracks, and preparation for the journey would be visible, even in deep snow. None were found. Starvation or disease was proposed, yet food supplies were untouched, and no bodies or graves were discovered. Sudden environmental disaster, such as an ice collapse or snowstorm, was considered, but the huts remained intact. Logical explanations failed to reconcile the facts, leaving only speculation. Some proposed extraordinary explanations. Could the villagers have been abducted by unknown humans or forces? Could there have been extraterrestrial involvement or some paranormal phenomenon? While improbable, these theories persisted because no conventional explanation fit the evidence. Over the years, the story entered legend, chronicled in newspapers and discussed by researchers, historians, and storytellers. Multiple independent accounts confirmed the essential facts: the village existed, was inhabited, and then vanished overnight. Walking through the village in one's imagination evokes an eerie silence. Snow drifts cover the ground, erasing subtle marks of life. The faint scent of frozen food and extinguished fires lingers. Dogs are absent, the echoes of their barks lost in the empty air. Each carefully arranged tool, each folded garment, each cooking pot tells a story of lives abruptly interrupted. The tension of absence is palpable, lingering in every corner, every hut, every frozen slab of fish or meat. The unsettling nature of the story lies in its ordinariness. There is no violence, no dramatic struggle, no gore, only absence. Life continued, objects remained, yet humans vanished. The Arctic, vast and indifferent, preserved the scene as if frozen in a moment. Snow drifted over huts, ice shifted imperceptibly, and time moved forward, leaving the mystery untouched. Even decades later, questions remain. Where did the villagers go? How could an entire settlement disappear without leaving tracks or evidence? Why was every object left in place, untouched, as if life itself had been momentarily paused? Investigators and historians continue to speculate, but no new evidence has emerged. The village that disappeared overnight remains an enigma, compelling and haunting. Joe Labelle's report had stirred both curiosity and unease among the authorities. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, accustomed to the harsh realities of the North, had seen many strange occurrences: lost trappers, sudden blizzards, and isolated disappearances. Yet, the sudden vanishing of an entire village, leaving behind perfectly preserved signs of life, was unprecedented. The trackers, seasoned men with decades of experience navigating the Arctic, approached the village with caution, their sled dogs alert and noses quivering, picking up scents that human senses could scarcely detect. As they neared the huts, the trackers noted the same eerie silence Joe had described. The snow was pristine. Even the faint tracks of small animals, usually present near human settlements, were absent or strangely displaced. Each hut stood undisturbed, their walls sturdy against the wind, smoke stains faint and cold from recently extinguished fires. The smell of dried fish, meat, and cooking oil lingered in the air, frozen but unmistakable. The trackers exchanged uneasy glances, understanding that no ordinary explanation could account for what lay before them. Inside the huts, the investigators were meticulous. Every utensil, tool, and piece of clothing was documented. Fish and meat remained carefully preserved in drying racks and on slabs. Pots rested as if a cook had been momentarily called away. Clothing was folded perfectly, ready for the next day's work. Even small personal items, beads, sewing tools, and toys were exactly where they had been last used. The absence of the villagers, combined with the immaculate state of their surroundings, created a tension that seemed to press against the walls, the floors, and the snow outside. The trackers moved methodically from hut to hut. They checked the graves. Some were empty. Others were partially disturbed, as if someone had been removed, or as if the earth itself had shifted. The cold was relentless, biting through clothing and into bone. Each breath of air carried a sharp sting, a reminder that the Arctic does not forgive mistakes or hesitation. Yet it was not the cold that unsettled the men most, it was the unnatural absence, the certainty that something had occurred here that no one could yet understand. As they examined the surroundings, the trackers took note of the frozen lake nearby. Ice had begun to form thick sheets across its surface, though cracks and fissures hinted at recent movement below. Tracks of wildlife, foxes, wolves, and occasional birds appeared at the periphery of the village, yet none led toward or away from the huts in a meaningful way. The trackers were trained to read the landscape, to follow subtle signs, but here the Arctic itself seemed to resist interpretation. Every clue led only to questions, every observation deepened the mystery. Over the next several days, search parties expanded further into the surrounding wilderness. They combed forests, scouted hills, and examined distant lakes and rivers. The village itself remained eerily undisturbed. No footprints or sled tracks emerged, no signs of hurried departure or struggle. Supplies remained untouched, fires cold, tools in their accustomed places. Each new discovery or lack thereof amplified the enigma. The trackers, despite their skill, admitted privately that they had never encountered anything quite like it. The local Inuit communities were questioned. Elders spoke of strange occurrences in the days leading up to the disappearance. Some mentioned unusual lights in the sky, faint and flickering, moving in patterns that did not match any known celestial phenomenon. Others reported a sudden calm in the air, a pause in the movement of wildlife, as though the world itself had held its breath. These accounts were anecdotal, difficult to verify, yet they persisted in telling the same general story: something extraordinary, something beyond ordinary explanation, had occurred. Inside the huts, investigators catalogued objects systematically. Pots, knives, and cutting tools were carefully photographed and labeled. Clothing, boots, mittens, and ceremonial items were documented with precision. Tools used for hunting and construction were found exactly where they had been left. The trackers noted small personal touches: a child's toy placed beside a bed, a sewing needle threaded but paused mid-stitch, a half-finished carving of an animal. These minute details, ordinary in any human settlement, became haunting reminders of the lives that had abruptly vanished. The psychological impact on the investigators was subtle yet profound. Each man had spent years in isolation, tracking and surviving in harsh conditions, yet the eerie calm of the village pressed against their minds. Nights in tents, lit only by small lanterns, were accompanied by the constant howl of wind across ice and snow. Shadows of the huts stretched and warped under flickering lamplight, evoking phantom movements. Some men reported fleeting impressions of figures in the distance, only to find that the snow was empty and silent. Even seasoned trackers, accustomed to the Arctic's harsh unpredictability, found themselves unsettled by the perfect stillness of the village. The mystery deepened when attempts were made to follow potential escape routes. Dogs trained to follow human scents could find no trace. Paths into the surrounding forest led only to undisturbed snow. The frozen lakes, potential avenues for departure, revealed no tracks across their ice. No evidence indicated that the villagers had left voluntarily, or been carried away by natural disaster. It was as if the village had been lifted out of existence, leaving behind only the tangible remnants of human life. Months passed. Newspapers carried reports of the strange disappearance, sparking discussion in towns across Canada and even overseas. The story became a legend, recounted by trappers, explorers, and researchers. Skeptics proposed conventional explanations: migration, disease, or misreporting. But the detailed accounts, corroborated by multiple independent sources, confirmed that the village had existed, had been inhabited, and then vanished almost instantaneously. As the years went by, the site remained undisturbed by human presence. Snow drifts covered the huts more completely each season, erasing tracks of visitors. Ice formed and cracked on the nearby lake, reshaping the environment in slow, relentless cycles. Tools, clothing, and personal belongings, though exposed to the cold, remained remarkably preserved. The Arctic's indifferent hand kept the mystery alive, holding it tightly in the frozen landscape. The village that disappeared overnight has continued to captivate imaginations precisely because it is quiet, subtle, and almost ordinary in its horror. There is no overt violence, no blood, no struggle, only absence. Life continued, objects remained, and yet humans were gone. The Arctic preserves the memory of their existence, yet conceals the reason for their disappearance. Every detail, every carefully arranged tool, every folded garment, every slab of frozen fish, carries the weight of unanswered questions. To imagine the village today is to picture a dream frozen in time. Snow drifts silently cover the landscape. The faint scent of dried meat lingers in the air, mingling with the cold. Huts stand intact but empty. Each object seems suspended in anticipation, waiting for human presence that will never return. The Arctic wind sweeps over the land, moving through empty doorways, brushing past abandoned clothing, and whispering across the frozen lake. Silence, heavy and absolute, presses against the mind, leaving a subtle tension that is felt more than seen. The psychological weight of absence is profound. Even decades later, researchers and storytellers describe an almost palpable presence in the village, the echo of lives interrupted, the sense of people who were there moments ago yet now gone. It is a tension that lingers in the imagination, amplified by the perfect order of the environment, the meticulous preservation of daily life, and the utter lack of explanation. The story's endurance lies in its subtlety. Unlike violent mysteries that shock or terrify, this one unsettles by its calmness, its ordinary nature, and its impossible disappearance. The villagers were not taken violently. They did not flee in panic. They vanished. And the world continued around them, indifferent and unyielding. Time passed, snow drifted, ice formed and cracked, but the mystery remained, intact, preserved by the very landscape that had nurtured the village. The days that followed the initial investigation were long, cold, and monotonous, yet filled with an unshakable sense of unease. The RCMP trackers, guided by experience and intuition honed over years in the Arctic, moved cautiously through the village and surrounding forests. Every footfall, every shift in the snow, seemed to carry hidden meaning, yet revealed nothing. The village remained untouched, its huts standing silent, the frozen remnants of daily life undisturbed. Tools, clothing, food all perfectly preserved whispered a story of sudden, inexplicable absence. Investigators expanded their search outward, moving along the frozen lakes and jagged cliffs that bordered the village. They looked for signs of escape, footprints, sled tracks, or disturbances in the snow. They followed the paths of animals, hoping that dogs, foxes, or caribou might have left subtle clues. Yet no trail emerged. Every area explored returned to the same unsettling conclusion: the village had vanished overnight, and nothing outside the village offered explanation. The Arctic itself seemed to participate in the mystery. Wind swept over the frozen lakes with a low, haunting howl, shaping snowdrifts and filling the air with a ghostly whistle. The sun hung low in the pale sky, casting long, distorted shadows over the landscape. Each hut, each frozen slab of food, each neatly folded garment, seemed to be caught in a suspended moment of time. The trackers felt the weight of this stillness pressing upon them, a tension that was nearly physical in its intensity. Inside the huts, investigators continued meticulous documentation. Pots, knives, and utensils were catalogued. Tools for hunting and fishing were photographed and labeled. Every detail, from the placement of a child's toy to a half-finished carving, was recorded. These ordinary items, frozen in their final use, became haunting symbols of human lives that had simply ceased to exist in this place. Even seasoned men, accustomed to harsh and isolated environments, admitted privately that the eerie perfection of the village was unlike anything they had encountered. Nightfall brought a different kind of tension. As temperatures dropped, snow compacted, and ice groaned under its own weight. Lanterns inside the tents flickered, casting long, wavering shadows that seemed to animate the still objects in the huts. The men reported glimpses of movement at the edges of their vision, shadows that vanished when directly looked at, rustling sounds in the distance that could not be traced. The mind, deprived of its usual distractions in the Arctic isolation, amplified every subtle stimulus. Each hour of darkness deepened the psychological weight of the mystery. The trackers attempted to follow potential escape routes. They examined the forests for hidden trails and the frozen lakes for any indication of passage. Dogs were brought along, trained to detect human scent, yet they too came to a standstill. Their noses quivered, but no track led away from the village. No evidence suggested that the villagers had left voluntarily, been swept away by natural disaster, or been taken by unknown forces. The absence of movement, combined with the presence of fully preserved daily life, defied every logical explanation. As the investigation unfolded, local Inuit communities were consulted more deeply. Elders recounted observations that, at first glance, seemed unrelated but, upon closer inspection, were strangely consistent. Strange lights had been observed in the northern skies, flickering and moving in patterns that defied ordinary explanation. Wildlife had behaved unusually, birds remained unusually silent, foxes and wolves avoided the village entirely, and dogs were skittish without cause. Even seasoned hunters remarked that the stillness of the air and snow was unlike anything they had ever experienced. These accounts, though anecdotal, reinforced the impression that some extraordinary phenomenon had occurred. Psychologically, the investigation had a cumulative effect. The trackers, though skilled and disciplined, began to notice subtle changes in perception. Sounds seemed amplified in the frozen stillness, the wind's howl suggested whispers, the shadows cast by the low sun appeared to shift unnaturally. Sleep was fitful, with dreams haunted by the silent figures of missing villagers. The mind, starved of normal stimuli and confronted by the absolute absence of life, conjured sensations that were impossible to verify but difficult to dismiss. Investigators documented not only physical evidence but also these psychological impressions. Notes described the oppressive silence, the sense of being watched, the subtle movement of shadows in the peripheral vision, and the strange impressions of life lingering in the empty huts. The village itself seemed to exert an almost conscious presence, a force that both fascinated and unnerved. Every detail of the frozen settlement, the smoke stains on the chimneys, the precise folding of clothing, the half-finished carvings, the carefully placed tools reinforced the surreal impression of life interrupted in an impossible way. Months of investigation revealed nothing definitive. Searches of the surrounding wilderness produced no signs of the missing villagers. Rivers, lakes, forests, and hills yielded only footprints of animals, snowdrifts, and ice formations. Nothing suggested voluntary departure or natural disaster. The story spread across the country, captivating newspapers, researchers, and explorers. Skeptics offered conventional explanations: exaggeration, misreporting, or migration, yet multiple independent accounts confirmed the essential facts: the village existed, was inhabited, and then disappeared. Even decades later, the tale of the village that disappeared overnight resonates precisely because of its quiet, subtle horror. There is no dramatic violence, no blood, no confrontation, only absence. Life continued in all other respects, objects remained perfectly in place, and the villagers themselves were gone. The Arctic, indifferent yet meticulously preserving the scene, keeps the mystery intact. Every object in the village tells a story, every hut stands as a witness, and every drift of snow erases any chance of reconstructing the events. Imagining the village today is like stepping into a dream frozen in time. Snow drifts silently across the huts, partially burying them, yet leaving enough exposed to reveal the meticulous order of human life. The faint scent of dried meat lingers in the frozen air. Tools, clothing, and utensils remain carefully arranged. Dogs, once companions and protectors, are absent. The Arctic wind sweeps through empty doorways, brushing past frozen objects and carrying the subtle tension of absence. Every detail suggests the presence of people, yet the emptiness is total. The enduring mystery lies in the ordinariness of what is gone. Unlike dramatic tragedies, this disappearance unsettles because it is quiet, orderly, and impossible. Every object left behind, every tool and article of clothing, evokes the lives that once were. The village was not abandoned in haste, it was not evacuated in fear. It simply vanished, leaving the ordinary, daily life preserved in a haunting tableau. Time moves on, snow drifts shift, ice forms and cracks, yet the enigma remains untouched. For those who imagine the scene, the tension is not in what happened but in the stillness that remains. Snow drifts blanket the ground, erasing potential clues. Frozen food, carefully placed tools, and meticulously folded clothing evoke the lives abruptly interrupted. The Arctic wind carries a whispering echo of absent voices. Shadows move in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. Silence itself becomes a character, a presence, a weight that presses against the mind and imagination. The village that disappeared overnight continues to captivate not through violence or spectacle, but through subtle, profound absence. It is a meditation on the fragility of life, the persistence of mystery, and the vast, indifferent landscapes of the Arctic. Objects remain as silent witnesses. Snow and ice preserve the scene. Time passes, and yet the story persists, quietly, hauntingly, and unresolved. The winter months pressed on, blanketing the Arctic in an unbroken expanse of snow and ice. The village remained undisturbed, its huts standing as frozen sentinels in the pale light. Investigators, trackers, and researchers had long departed, leaving only the wind, the drifting snow, and the silent testimony of carefully preserved human life. The Arctic itself seemed to cradle the mystery, holding it in place, untouched and unanswerable. Those who returned to the site in later years spoke of an almost spiritual sensation, a quiet tension that settled over the landscape. The huts, though weathered by frost and snow, retained their structure. Tools, pots, and clothing lay precisely as they had been decades before. Even the frozen slabs of fish and meat suggested a life suddenly paused, the ordinary rhythm of daily tasks frozen mid-motion. Observers remarked on the profound stillness, the absence of sound, the absence of life, and the faint but undeniable presence of what had once been. Walking through the village today, one cannot help but feel the weight of absence pressing against the mind. Each step crunches softly in the snow, yet the village itself seems untouched, as if time flows around it rather than through it. The Arctic wind sweeps across the frozen lakes, its sound both haunting and gentle, whispering through empty doorways and curling around the abandoned objects. Every tool, Every piece of clothing, every utensil tells a story of normalcy abruptly interrupted, a story frozen in place by both nature and mystery. The psychological effect of this scene is profound. Observers often describe a feeling of suspended time, of life that might return at any moment yet never does. The Arctic's silence amplifies every subtle sound: the whisper of wind, the faint shift of snow, the groan of ice expanding and contracting. Shadows stretch long under the low sun, bending and warping with every hour. Even the most seasoned visitors report an almost imperceptible sense of movement at the edges of perception, a fleeting shadow, a whisper of sound, a ghostly impression of life that is no longer present. It is in these details that the story's power endures. Unlike dramatic disappearances, which rely on violence or chaos, the mystery of the village unsettles because it is subtle, ordinary, and total. Food is left uneaten, clothing folded, tools placed as if waiting for their owners to return. Huts stand intact, smoke stains visible but cold. Even the graveyard retains its quiet, undisturbed presence, adding a layer of unease. There is no immediate danger, no visible threat, yet the absence itself becomes the central, haunting figure of the story. Researchers, historians, and storytellers have revisited the village many times, each leaving with more questions than answers. Skeptics attempt logical explanations: migration, disease, environmental factors, but each falls short when confronted with the details. Migration leaves tracks, disease leaves evidence, environmental disasters leave destruction. Here, every detail points toward a different reality: life, ordinary and ordered, interrupted in a way that defies understanding. For the modern visitor, imagining the village evokes a surreal meditation. The Arctic landscape is unforgiving, yet it preserves. Snow drifts slowly accumulate over the huts, partially burying their structures, yet leaving enough exposed to reveal the careful order within. The scent of frozen meat, faint but present, mingles with the crisp, cold air. Tools, utensils, and clothing remain perfectly arranged, evoking the lives that once were. Silence is absolute, yet it hums with tension, a subtle vibration that presses gently against the mind. Each hut becomes a microcosm of human routine, preserved mid-action. Cooking utensils are left as if a meal were about to be served. Fishing tools rest near drying racks, ready for use. Clothing is folded, mittens and boots paired precisely. Even small personal touches: a child's toy, a beadwork project, a partially carved figure remain intact. These ordinary details, when frozen in time, acquire a haunting significance. They tell the story of human life interrupted, of absence in a place otherwise unchanged. The Arctic wind continues its eternal sweep, filling the village with movement and stillness. Snow drifts shift imperceptibly, reshaping the ground and partially burying objects, yet leaving enough exposed to maintain the narrative of life interrupted. The low sun casts long shadows that bend and stretch across huts, tools, and snowdrifts. Each shadow seems alive, moving subtly as the day progresses, creating a rhythm that is both mesmerizing and disquieting. The village that disappeared overnight is not a story of spectacle, but of subtle horror. It is the ordinariness of disappearance, the calmness of absence, that unsettles. Life, tools, clothing, food, and order remain, the humans themselves are gone. The Arctic landscape preserves this tableau, indifferent yet precise, holding both the evidence and the mystery in its frozen embrace. As one imagines the scene, the tension is both gentle and insistent. The snow crunches underfoot, echoing softly. The wind hums in the background. Shadows shift as the sun arcs low across the pale sky. Every object tells a story, every hut stands as a witness, and every frozen slab of meat or fish is a silent testament to interrupted life. The village is alive in its absence, a narrative carried through objects, weather, and memory. Even decades after the initial discovery, the story resonates. The absence remains total. The Arctic preserves both the village and its mystery. Researchers and storytellers continue to revisit, yet every expedition confirms the same facts: the village existed, it was inhabited, and then it vanished overnight. The details, preserved meticulously, defy explanation. Every observer leaves with a sense of awe and unease, carrying the story forward into modern imagination. The village teaches a profound lesson about human fragility, the unknowable nature of the world, and the subtle ways absence can shape perception. It is not a tale of sudden violence, but of silent, complete disappearance. It is not a spectacle of terror, but a meditation on the impermanence of human life. Every object left behind, every hut standing in frozen order, is a testament to what once was, and what will never return. Let your mind linger on this image: the Arctic wind sweeping across the village, snow drifting over huts, shadows bending and stretching, the faint scent of frozen food lingering in the crisp air. Tools, clothing, and utensils are frozen in time, ordinary yet profound. Silence dominates, yet hums with tension, pressing softly against the imagination. This is the essence of the village that disappeared overnight, a mystery preserved by ice, snow, and time itself. As night falls across the Arctic, the village is cloaked in darkness, yet every detail remains visible under starlight. The snow glows faintly, reflecting the pale light of the moon. Shadows lengthen and blend, creating patterns that seem to suggest movement. The Arctic wind sighs, carrying with it the faint memory of life once lived, of footsteps that will never return, of voices that will never speak again. The story concludes not with answers, but with reflection. Life continues elsewhere, yet the village remains frozen in the imagination. The objects, the huts, the snow, the wind all preserve the mystery. The village that disappeared overnight endures because it is ordinary yet extraordinary, silent yet compelling, frozen yet profoundly alive in its absence. And as you imagine this village, let the calm, gentle tension wash over you. Let the snow, the wind, the shadows, and the silence fill your mind. Let the mystery linger softly, haunting but not threatening, subtle yet insistent. The Arctic holds its secrets tightly, and the village remains a timeless, quiet testament to the unknown.